Ducts have a few problems. The main issue is wasted energy, and we'll talk about that at some length down the road. But right now, let's talk about a few of the other issues that are related to ducts. One of them is indoor air quality. When the return ducts run through unheated spaces, they're often in dusty environments or places where there are all kinds of potential harmful materials, like fiberglass insulation, like dust, pesticides, and mold. Returns are under a negative pressure, so they suck air into the airstream whenever there's a leak, and so contaminants are drawn into the ducts from some unpleasant environments and could be distributed throughout the house. Also, you can have pressure issues that drive moisture-laden air into building cavities where water vapor can condense and support mold growth and even decay. Duct leakage can also create drafts and other uncomfortable problems. The first step with ducts inside is to decide, well, what's inside and what's outside. This is not always as clear-cut as it may seem. In most cases, the garage, attic, and crawl space are outside. Builders and tradespeople need to have a clear understanding of where the boundary is. We call this the thermal boundary. One important characteristic of the thermal boundary is continuity. If you were looking at a set of plans, you should be able to place a red marker on the plans and trace the thermal boundary around the entire building without lifting the marker from the paper. That means that the thermal boundary is continuous. We'll talk more about other characteristics of the thermal boundary a bit later. Even though we don't hang out in the ducts, it's important to recognize that ducts carry conditioned air, and therefore it's really an extension of the living space. A typical 2x6 wall has an insulating value of about R16 or R18, but ducts are only insulated R8. So what we're doing is extending the air in the living space through these ducts, and yet we're insulating it to only half the level that we would insulate the living space itself. Ducts also leak air, and if they're not sealed with mastic, the total heat loss from a ducted system is probably around 15 to 20%. So you're taking a 90% efficient furnace and you're turning it into perhaps an even 70% efficient furnace. Sealing and insulating the ducts reduces this loss by about half. But to get to the other half, you need to move the ducts inside. These pictures really drive home the idea that the attic is outside the thermal boundary. On the left, you see an infrared thermometer. It shows the temperature of the ceiling drywall at about 65 degrees, so that's essentially the building's interior temperature. The attic air, shown on the right, is only about 39 degrees Fahrenheit, which is very close to the outdoor temperature on this particular day. This demonstrates very clearly that the attic is actually outside the thermal boundary. Now, if you look at the surface temperature of the duct itself, it's about 50 degrees. That indicates that the duct is clearly warmer than the surrounding air, and you're really getting a lot of heat loss from the duct into the attic, even though the duct is insulated. This heat loss occurs in two different ways. First, you have conductive losses directly through the duct material itself. That's about half the heat loss. On the left, you can see an example of conductive losses. This particular yellow spot on the image on the left is actually a Y connection, a metal Y, and it's not insulated, so it gets a lot of heat loss. So it kind of exaggerates the effect a little bit, but you can certainly see the duct standing out from the background on the infrared image on the left. Metal fittings that connect sections of flex duct can cause big problems. And on the right, you can see how air leakage affects heat loss. That's a distribution box with a lot of air leaking around through seams and little gaps that haven't been sealed.